This is like after action report for any of my military guys. They get that. So I just got done with a session. I talked to my client about hitting the record button after my session. He is aware that I'm hitting the record button. To be super clear from an ethical standpoint, I am not going to share any identifying information. But I feel like we had a really relevant conversation to something that may be somewhat ubiquitous to just being a human being or just being a citizen in a society of thinking, of constraints, of obligations, of servitude, where we are constantly punished, we are constantly pathologized, we are constantly separated and divided for experiencing honest emotion, honest expressions, honest sensations, honest reactions to an unjust, manipulative, using and abusing environment. And the core issue of the client I just met with, I will say, just for socio-political reasons, that he happens to be a black man. And even as I say that, as a white man saying that, him and I just had this conversation together, one-on-one, and we acknowledged all the labels and all the things and all the ways that society labels us and uses us and abuses us and separates and divides us. I'm saying it, though, to acknowledge his unique experience in society, because that's a part of the conversation. So the core issue that ended up being this expansive conversation was, he is constantly told, even by people close to him, that he has anger issues. And in the context of the conversation, I said, that could in a lot of ways be interpreted as sort of a perpetuation of subjugation, or a perpetuation of a European white, or more of like a classist power dynamic. What do I mean by that, so people don't get lost in the politics of it? Instead of saying that this man is experiencing honest emotion, that his anger is an honest expression of his daily experience of perceiving and experiencing that his voice does not matter. That regardless of what he experiences, if he expresses frustration, if he expresses anger, he is told by the world around him that he has a personal issue with anger, that his anger is a pathology, or that his depression that comes when his anger isn't heard and he experiences learned helplessness, that his anger, his depression, his anxiety is a personal pathology, that he has a unique problem as an individual, rather than that his body is perfectly fine, that his mind is perfectly fine, that he is living in this beautiful vessel that is telling him that something is really fucked up with his environment, that he's experiencing natural emotion, that his anger is telling him that something is wrong. His anger is telling him that a rule has been broken. His anger is telling him that something is unjust or unjust. His anger is a natural expression. It's an automatic natural expression of injury that is meant to tell him something is wrong, that is meant to alert him that he needs to protect himself in some ways, or that he needs to set a boundary in some ways, or that he needs to correct something that is wrong. Now, if you think about all of this in a tribal context, or a context that predates the modern constraints of modern humankind, where we have learned to use and abuse and pathologize people, to use all sorts of medical mythologies and pharmaceutical and medicinal mythologies to pathologize people for experiencing natural emotion. If you look at the world before that, why do we have emotion? Why do we have anger? Why do we have sadness? Why do we have anxiety? Well, our limbic brain, our limbic system, our autonomic nervous system, the entire self-preservative mechanism of the human body is designed to cross-reference present moment input, present moment perspective with everything you have ever learned about right and wrong and meaning and survival. It cross-references present moment perception and input with everything you have ever learned. And it decides whether you are in danger or not in a fraction of a second, about 200 milliseconds, so far as I can understand from neurobiology. And it is meant to be a quick response to the environment around us that we utilize as a source of information. If we were taught and trained and calibrated properly by the world and by the elders around us, by the environment around us, then we would teach our children, and we would be taught progressively that we live in this beautiful vessel that is made to automatically perceive the world around us, and that if we learn to listen to, if we learn to observe mindfully, if we learn to train our mind and body to be a vessel that is a trusted source of information, then we would learn to observe the automatic sensations of our body as a source of information and data and wisdom, and we would use that to guide our choices and our actions and our behaviors. But for this man that I'm working with, and that is a representation of everyone I work with, and it's a representation of me as an individual, regardless of label, regardless of gender, regardless of status. We all have this ubiquitous experience in the United States of America, in Western thinking, that our emotions are inherently flawed, they are inherently pathology, that our emotional experience, whether it be anger, depression, anxiety, whatever, is an indication that we have a mental health problem, that something is wrong with us as individuals, rather than that I as an individual, my client as an individual, us as a collective are living in a toxic environment. We are living in a sick environment. We are living in a world where our food is poison, our medicine is poison, our ideas are poison, our societal structures that we are in servitude to are poison. They are toxic. They are not serving us as individuals. They are not meant to promote our wellness or our well-being or our health or our children's well-being or our children's health. These systems are meant to feed upon us, to use and abuse us. So it serves these systems rather than my client's emotions are a legitimate expression of him navigating a toxic and sick environment. Convincing him and convincing his wife and his children that he has an anger problem and that there's something wrong with him is a really clever way to invalidate his entire experience. It's a clever way to subjugate him. It's a clever way to shut him up. Because what if we had to listen to him and say, wow, his anger is an expression of him experiencing injustice every day, probably on his way home. Someone will look at him sideways just for being a black man driving in his car in rush hour. And on my way home, someone might look at me sideways for being a white man with a beard driving on my way home in traffic. And someone may look at someone else for driving and being a woman. You get the point. We are constantly used and abused and subjugated and pathologized for expressing natural emotion that is an automatic response to living in a sick, twisted, manipulative, consuming environment. So every time we say ouch loudly, we're told that we have a mental health problem. We're told, here's your pill. Here's your diagnosis. Here's what's wrong with you as an individual. Rather than your emotions are telling you the truth, and our emotions are collectively telling us the truth, and we don't have a mental health crisis. We don't have a depression crisis. We don't have an anxiety crisis. We have a crisis of ideology. We have a crisis of doctrine. We have a crisis of ethics. We have a crisis of morality. And all of our bodies are telling us the truth. But we are told that all of our bodies are sick and pathologized, and that we have diseases and disorders, and that we all have individual, unique mental health problems, which totally invalidates our voices. It totally invalidates the truth of what our bodies are telling us. It totally invalidates the inherent wisdom that we were born with, that we felt in our bodies as children, that started to be denied and pathologized and punished when we expressed it as children. And we learned to morph ourselves and to minimize ourselves. And we learned to adapt ourselves to a sick world that consumes off of us. And we actually took on the pathology of our abusers. And we actually internalized it. And my client internalized it. And his family internalized it. And rather than all of us looking at each other and saying, I see you man who is angry. I see you woman who is angry. I see you black man who is angry. I see you black woman who is angry. I see you human being who is experiencing sadness, anger, anxiety, post-traumatic stress. I see you and I hear you and I validate the emotion you're experiencing because it is a natural expression to the world that you're living in. And I want you to learn how to listen to it. I want you to learn how to validate it within yourself. I want you to learn how to train and to teach yourself to correctly learn how to observe the sensations within your body as a source of information and wisdom, not as truth, but as a source of information and wisdom. And I want you to stop believing that you're sick and something is wrong with you because you feel anger or you feel sadness or you feel depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress or whatever. To my client who will listen to this, who I just spoke to, who acknowledged and gave me permission to utilize our conversation as a starting point for this recording, I certainly see you, and I hope that the way that I just articulated myself in this recording does you justice. Because I know that if we could have recorded our conversation and I could have just posted that, it probably would have been a better representation of what I'm trying to say. But I hope I captured it reasonably well. Namaste, motherfuckers. I see you. Take care.